There is a question that almost every person who has ever lost someone has asked, usually late at night, usually alone. Does he know I'm okay? Does she still think about us? Is there any part of them left that still cares? Most people never say it out loud because it sounds like something you're not supposed to ask. Science has an answer ready for you. The brain stops. The person stops. Consciousness ends. There is nothing to worry about anything because there's nothing left. That's the official answer. But here's what's strange. The people who have actually been there, the ones who crossed that line and somehow came back, they don't tell that story. Not even close. Let's start at the beginning. The very moment the heart stops, your blood pressure drops to 0. The oxygen that was feeding your brain stops moving, and for about 10 seconds, nothing changes. Your brain is still running on whatever oxygen is left in the blood. Your thoughts are still happening. You are still you, but that window is closing. Around 10 seconds and the cerebral cortex starts shutting down. This is the part of your brain that runs conscious thought. Your eyes stop processing. Your ears stop registering sound. From the outside, you look gone, but from the inside, something very different is happening. In 2023, a neuroscientist named Gemma Borzigian at the University of Michigan published a study that nobody saw coming. Her team had been monitoring the brain activity of 4 comatose patients as they were taken off life support. They expected to see a slow fade, brain activity winding down like a machine losing power. That is not what they found. In 2 of the 4 patients within seconds of losing oxygen, the brain surged. A massive spike of gamma wave activity exploded across the brain. Gamma waves. The same brain waves associated with heightened awareness. Deep concentration, vivid dreaming. The most conscious states a brain can reach. And this surge wasn't random noise. It was organized, structured, concentrated in a very specific region, a part of the brain called the temporoparietal occipital junction, the same region previous research has linked to ALMA out-of-body experiences, to visual processing, to the sense of self in space. Borzigian described the surge as, quote, crazy high. The dying brain was not shutting down, it was turning on. But here's the part of Borzigian's finding that almost nobody reports. The activity wasn't concentrated in the survival regions of the brain, not the areas that manage fear, not the areas that signal pain, not the primal fight or flight systems you'd expect a dying brain to reach for. The surge was happening in the regions that process meaning, faces, memory, connection, the people we love. The last thing the brain organizes around is not survival, it's the people, always the people. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this is where science runs into something it cannot fully explain. For decades, near-death experiences were dismissed as hallucinations, random electrical misfires, the brain under oxygen deprivation, producing noise that feels meaningful but isn't. That was the explanation. It was clean. It was simple. And then the data started coming in. Dr. Sam Parnia is a resuscitation researcher at New York University. He has spent over 20 years doing one thing, studying what happens to consciousness during cardiac arrest. His AWARE studies, the largest research project of their kind, examined hundreds of cardiac arrest patients across 25 hospitals. The findings are hard to dismiss. In the AWARE 2 study published in 2023, roughly 40% of cardiac arrest survivors reported some form of conscious perception during the time they were clinically dead. Not a vague feeling, not a dream, structured thoughts, clear memories, a sense of being present and aware. About 20% described what researchers now call a recalled experience of death, and around 3% reported full visual and auditory awareness. They could see, they could hear, while their hearts were not beating, while their brains showed no visible activity to anyone in the room. 3% sounds small, until you do the math. Over 300,000 people experience cardiac arrest every year in the United States alone. 3% of that is 9,000 people, every year, seeing and hearing while clinically dead. Now here's where it gets specific, because across all of these accounts, from different countries, different cultures, different religions, different ages, one thing kept appearing. The dead were there, not strangers, not figures of light, the specific people who had died before them. A grandmother standing at the end of a hallway, a father sitting quietly in a chair, a childhood friend who had been gone for decades, calm, present, waiting. Dr. Peter Fenwick spent 30 years at King's College London collecting these accounts. He called it the most consistent finding in all of near-death research. The dying are met by someone they loved. Now, the rational explanation is ready. The brain, under extreme stress, reaches for comfort. It pulls familiar faces from memory. It constructs a comforting scene to soften what's happening. That's what brains do. They protect us. Fine. Except that explanation has a problem, a very specific problem. In several documented cases, the person who appeared to the dying patient was someone whose death the patient had no way of knowing about. A woman in Ohio in the 1970s was dying in a hospital bed. She told her nurse she could see her brother standing there, waiting for her. She was confused because her brother was alive. At least she thought he was. The nurse said nothing but checked the records. The brother had died 2 hours earlier, in a different hospital across the city. No one had told the patient. No one had told anyone in her room. Dr. Carlos Osis and Dr. Erlander Haraldson documented over 30 cases exactly like this in their landmark 1977 study, published in a book called At the Hour of Death. Cases where the dying person saw someone they had no way of knowing was already gone. The brain pulling comfort from memory cannot produce the face of someone it didn't know was dead. There's no version of that explanation that works here. So let's ask the question directly. Do the dead still worry about their family? Here is what we know. In the final surge of brain activity, the dying brain is not thinking about money, not replaying regrets, not running survival calculations. It is going to the people, the faces, the connections, the ones it loves. And on the other side of that threshold, based on what the dying report, the people who were already gone came back, not in pain, not in fear, not to warn or haunt, but simply to be there, to wait, to meet. That is not nothing. There's a hospice nurse named Maggie Callanan. She spent over 20 years sitting with people in the last days of their lives. She wrote a book about it called Final Gifts. And in that book, she describes something she witnessed so many times it stopped surprising her. She called it nearing death awareness. In the days and hours before death, patients who had been barely conscious, patients on heavy medication, patients who hadn't spoken in days, would suddenly become alert, lucid, present. They would reach towards something in the air. They would speak to people who weren't visible in the room. They would describe preparing for a journey. They would ask for permission to go. One elderly man kept reaching his arms upward and saying over and over, "I'm coming, I'm coming." His daughter was sitting beside him. She asked who he was talking to. He looked at her clearly. He said, "Your mother." His wife had been dead for 11 years. Callanan documented hundreds of cases like this, and she noticed something consistent across every single one. After these moments of awareness, after the patient spoke to whoever they saw, the struggle stopped. The face changed. Something that looked like relief moved across them, and within hours, they were gone. Not frightened, not alone, ready. Now here is the question that no one in science can answer. If the dead are gone, if there is truly nothing left, then why do they keep showing up at exactly the right moment? Why is it always the grandmother? Why is it always the brother? Why not a stranger? Why not no one? The comfort hallucination theory says we reach for familiar faces. Fine, but it cannot explain reaching for a face you didn't know was dead. It cannot explain the consistency across thousands of accounts from people who never met each other. It cannot explain the peace, because here is what the data actually tells us. The experience of dying, for the vast majority of people who have been there and come back, is not painful. It is not dark. It is not empty. It is peaceful. Not the peace of nothing, the peace of something. We don't know what the dead experience. We have no instruments for that. No study has followed someone past that line and returned with data, but we have this. The dying reach towards someone, and that someone reaches back. Maybe that is just the brain. Maybe it is the most elaborate comfort mechanism evolution ever built. A final story the mind tells itself to make the ending bearable. Or maybe, and this is the part science has to leave open, maybe love is not a product of the brain. Maybe the brain is just where we feel it while we're here. And when the brain is gone, the love doesn't go with it. Maybe worry is the wrong word entirely, because the accounts don't describe the dead as worried. They don't describe them as anxious or watching from a distance helpless and afraid. They describe them as calm, as present, as waiting, standing close, with all the time in the world. Every person who has ever lost someone has felt it at least once. That moment in an empty room when something shifted, a warmth you couldn't explain, a feeling that they weren't entirely gone, that something of them was still nearby. Science calls that grief, the brain creating presence where there is none. But maybe it's also something else, because the people who come back, the cardiac arrest survivors, the ones who crossed that line and returned, they don't come back talking about the light. They don't come back with theological arguments. They come back changed. They stop worrying about things that don't matter. They call their family more. They say, "I love you," like they mean it. Every single time, because they learned something on the other side they cannot quite put into words. When researchers ask them what changed, what they understood that they didn't before, almost all of them say the same thing. The people are what matter. Just the people. Nothing else even comes close. It's not the achievements, not the milestones, not the money or the status or the things you built. It's the Tuesday afternoon you sat with someone and said nothing. It's the phone call you almost didn't make. It's the moment you stayed when you could have left. Those are the moments that flash before your eyes at the end. Your brain recorded all of them, even the ones that didn't feel important, especially those. So do the dead worry about their family? Maybe the honest answer is, we don't know what they do. We can't. Not yet. But based on everything, the brainwave data, the survivor accounts, the 30 years of hospice observations, the cases science cannot explain, it doesn't look like worry. It looks like something quieter than that. Something that doesn't need to check in or follow up or wonder if you're okay. Because maybe from wherever they are, if they are anywhere at all, they already know. The love is still there. It just doesn't feel like worry anymore. It feels like certainty. Simple and complete. The way love always wanted to be but never quite managed while there was still time.